In this video, I'm going to take you through a real-time demo of a drawing of this Highland cow. So the inspiration for this drawing was a combination of things, actually. The first thing is that a while ago I did an animal alphabet challenge, a series of videos using a Sharpie marker pen to create drawings without any pencil drawing at all. And that's something I've been thinking about recently, about getting back to. I've come across a Sharpie marker which has a chisel tip, so I want to try those out for drawing. But in addition, fairly recently, if you remember, I did a series of commissioned drawings, and that had actually been the first time in several months, I think, that I'd done any sort of serious drawing. So I do sketching quite often, you know, where I'm just sort of casually sketching away. But producing a finished drawing is something I hadn't done in quite a while, and I really enjoyed it. So what I'm going to do today is use pencil. You can see I've started out using a 9B pencil here. And I'm working on Bristol board, A4 in size, so it's around about 11 inches by 8 inches. And Bristol board, if you haven't used it before, is an ultra smooth surface drawing paper, so it's really lovely to draw on. And then what I'll do later on in the video is I'm going to go over this, or enhance the pencil drawing, using a blue ballpoint pen. And that's a really cool combo. I really enjoy using ballpoint pen with pencil. For the commissioned works I used black ink, so I thought it would be good to change things up, and I love using blue in my work anyway. So Highland cattle are traditionally based in Scotland, or that's where they hail from. Opposite end of the country from me, I'm down in the south. Scotland is obviously up in the north, but this particular Highland cow was encountered on Dartmoor, which is a huge national park. I guess it's, I don't know, it's probably around about, depends where you go on Dartmoor, but I guess it's around about 7 to 10 miles away from my house. And these cattle are owned by people, but they're free to roam on Dartmoor. And it's actually very, very rare to see a Highland cow on Dartmoor. There aren't very many of them at all, and Dartmoor is a huge area. So it was really special to encounter these purely by chance and be able to get a few reference photos. But coming back to the inspiration for the project, I mentioned the Animal Alphabet Challenge, which was a series of 26 drawings and paintings. And I mentioned the recent commissioned work. So my thinking was, it'd be good to do another series of drawings. So what I'm actually going to do is try to do a drawing, if I can find the references, of the 10 native breeds of cattle from the UK. So this is the first one. This is episode 1, Highland Cow. And I found an article from Country Life magazine which details all of the native breeds. I'll put a link to that in the description if you want to check it out, because there are some quite, as you might expect, quite rare breeds there, lesser known breeds, along with some more popular breeds as well. So I thought it would be good to do a series of drawings, one for each of the native breeds. Anyway, back to the drawing in hand. So what I've done, as you can see, is started out with a fairly loose and fairly simplified drawing of the outline of the animal. And then having done that, I put in just a few key lines to indicate the borders of the main shadow areas. Nothing too intricate, but in particular that line of that sort of big block of shadow on the torso, I've indicated the edge of that. I also changed the shape and angle of the horn on our right a little bit, just to make that work a little better with the line of the back. And I've been doing some shading since then, so just generally blocking in, but I'm keeping the direction of my line, my lines as I do the shading quite controlled. So for example, the shading on the ears is more or less in line with the way the hair falls on the ears. The shading on the head, you can see below the mop of hair going over the eyes, that's describing the contours of the head. And so I'm just keeping, I'm not being too strict about it, but I'm just sort of keeping that in mind, either trying to mimic the contour of the animal or the general direction in which the hair might fall. And what I wish I often had the foresight to do is sometimes just perhaps not tape down my paper quite so vigorously. And this little light pencil sketch where there's not very much detail at all, what I wish I'd done is actually scanned that in as a standalone pencil sketch, because I'm happy with the way this particular drawing worked out, but I think there's a sort of purity and simplicity to the sketch just as it is now, or perhaps with a little bit more shading as I'm putting on the back legs. But I think it kind of works as a pencil sketch alone. One of the reasons I use the 9B is, first of all, you don't have to push very hard at all to get quite a dark line. And ideally with this, I don't want to damage the smooth surface of this paper at all. So I'm just working really quite lightly. I'm not going to press on into the paper to create any grooves or anything like that. And then the other thing is, for this particular drawing, I don't do it at all, I don't think. But often what I like to do is, having shaded these areas, I like to smudge them with my finger. And of course, a nice soft pencil like a 9B, that's very easily smudged and blended. So those are the reasons I tend to go with the 8B or the 9B. Now, the other thing I'm planning on doing for this series of drawings is I'm not really going to include any background, maybe a little bit, but probably not much at all, so that they'll just be sort of standalone drawings, the animal, and then something indicating the animal is on the ground. So in this particular case, you can see in the reference, we've got this cast shadow. So I'm doing my version of that, and also taking care to include some silhouettes of grass blades and plant life and things on the edges of that shadow. So yeah, I think I'm definitely going to do a few more pencil sketches of these cattle, and just leave them in an unfinished state like that. I think it looks quite nice just like that, really. But anyway, into the blue ballpoint pen. Now, of course, you could do this with any color you like, really. You could do red or green, or whatever you think works. But I'm just a fan of blue in my drawings, and blue and grey in particular is a favorite color combo. But of course, when I scan this in, I can always convert the image to black and white as well if I want a completely monochrome finished image, to create products or prints from. So you kind of get the best of both worlds when you use this technique. So what I'm doing here is deviating quite a bit really from the reference. So now that I'm getting into the line work, I'm kind of adding my own style and my own little motifs to the depiction of the animal. So for example, if you look along the top of the head there, you can see there's kind of a bump I've put in more or less central on the top of the head, and I've put a little hole in the middle of that bump, and that's meant to depict a little lock of hair, which is just lifting up and then coming back down from the top of the head. That's a little motif I quite often include in hairy animals. And then created the kind of mop of hair falling over the forehead. You can see I've picked out the edge of that mop as a whole, but within that I've included the odd extra lock of hair. And then I've also included a few almost triangular shaped holes in there to indicate locks of hair lifting off. So again, what I'm doing is essentially describing the big shape and then putting in a few little negative shapes, those near triangular shapes, or the hole in that loop. And that's an efficient way to depict hair, rather than trying to describe multiple strands of hair. Now, it's not to say that's the best way to go or the only way to go. It's just the way I like doing it at this particular moment in time. And then when it comes to the ears, I've just highlighted the raggediness of the edges, taking care not to become too repetitive with the shape of those sort of furry edged ears. And then just finishing, really defining the edges of the horns there to make sure that they're locked into place. Now, again, on the back here, I'm being quite selective and careful about the direction of the lines I'm putting. So I've looked at the hair on the back of the animal, and I've tried to distill what I'm seeing down into the simplest form, which will help me describe the shape of that part of the back. So there's kind of a lump in the part in the back there, basically the top of the shoulder. So notice that the curved lines I've put down to the right of the peak of the shoulder are falling down to the right, and then on the other side of the peak they go down to the left. So I'm helping to describe the contours of that lump of the shoulder. And I'm doing something similar here on the horn. Those lines are all carefully directed to describe the curvature of the surface of the horn and how the direction of the horn changes. So those contours change angle because the angle that we're viewing the horn from is changed. Well, we're viewing at the same angle, but obviously the horn is changing direction as it goes through the bend. Now on the face of the animal, I've already got some contours in place from the pencil work. Now I don't need to mimic those. I can go over them and leave the pencil work showing through. I can use those contours as a bit of a guide along which I can follow, very roughly, or I could deliberately trace over a particularly delicious pencil mark, which by chance has turned out really quite well. So you've got lots of choices there. You can just mimic what you've done before, you can ignore it, or just enhance it in some way. I've started to indicate an eye there, just because I don't want this animal's eyes to be completely obscured. And in general, when I'm drawing away here, whether I'm working with the pencil or with the ballpoint pen, what I'm always trying to keep in mind is I'm always trying to ask myself the question, what is the minimum I can do to describe what I'm seeing? And I think that's very important with artwork, because one, the fewer lines we make, the less chance there is of a mistake. That's the first sort of practical thing. Secondly, I think the less we can do, often it has more visual impact. And thirdly, it leaves us more choices as well. So if you put down 20 lines, then the next line you put down, in some ways, I think you're more limited about what you can do. Whereas if you've only put down 3, you can sort of think, well, okay, which is the next bit that I want to shade? Do I want to shade this next bit super dark? But once I've done that, of course, I can't really go back very easily with ballpoint pen. You are committed. So I'm not sure how much sense that last bit made, but hopefully you got the gist of it, that by doing the minimum possible, you leave the various pathways open in the immediate future. So again, here I'm having a bit of fun, really. I'm including locks of hair, which more or less mimic the fall of the hair on the animal, but I'm taking care to vary my marks, and I'm thinking about what would actually happen. So just below the lowest point of the right hand horn, you can see there are 2 quite long locks of hair. And notice how I've deliberately had one of those locks overlap another lock of hair. So what you want to definitely avoid is a repetitive mark making. So for example, if you drew a capital W, just basically a zigzag line, you definitely don't want to do a repeated WWWW pattern. You know, you want to add a bit of curvature to your zigzags and a bit of variation. So down to the edges of the outline of the front leg now. So I've got to be careful here that the upper part I included some nice squiggles, but when it came to the knee and the lower leg, I've got to make sure I get the line of that right. So I didn't include any squiggles there because I thought it might detract from the structure of the leg. Onto the edge of the cast shadow, I can have a bit more fun here because grass just falls in a random way. So notice I've included quite near the front foot, sort of directly vertically below the left nostril, right down at the edge of that cast shadow. You can see that I've included a couple of little loops in the outline of the grass, mimicking the motif I used on the top of the animal's head. And then watching this back, I'm looking now and thinking, well, you know, I could have almost stopped here and just left this drawing partially inked. Yeah, I think that makes quite a nice, interesting image. But there are some sort of practical issues to consider as well. So on the one hand, while it's really nice to sort of generate multiple versions of a drawing from, you know, one drawing session, so I could have had the initial pencil sketch, the partially inked sketch, the fully inked sketch, and then in addition, I can have black and white versions or monochrome versions of all of those. You know, that's creating, you know, 5, 6 images for one drawing, so that's really good in a way. But at the same time, that creates a lot of artistic admin. If I'm going to display those to the world, instead of uploading one image to my website and scanning one image, I've now got to upload, you know, 5 or 6. So, you know, we have to make a choice about how we want to use our time and energy. So just put a couple of deliberate lumps and bumps in the back there to indicate bits of hair which are not quite as neatly combed as they might be. And I've included a bit more of the tail, if you notice, in the pencil drawing than is actually visible in the reference, because I think that adds a little more character to the animal. Notice I'm keeping some of my pen work broken as well. So if you look, not so much on the animal, but there are a couple of little gaps along the line of the back, and also on the edge of the cast shadow. The outline isn't entirely complete. There are gaps. And I think that just gives a more natural energetic feel to the line work than doing a, beautifully complete single line all the way around. So now I'm starting to think about just how dark do I want to go with the darkest areas of this drawing. And again, notice I'm not just sort of scribbling in those dark areas, I'm keeping the line work when I'm shading quite controlled on the legs in particular, not so much on the grass blades because they're smaller areas. And again, I want a kind of more of a random texture on the grass to distinguish it a little bit from that of the animal. And it's not the one's necessarily worse than the other, but I think it's important to be aware of what you're doing. So now I'm moving to larger areas on the cast shadow. You can see I'm taking a little more care with the direction of the line work. And notice how I've varied that as well within the cast shadow. Okay, so it's not just on the legs, it's quite uniform from top to bottom. Just kept it kind of nice and neat, going diagonally down and to the right. But when it comes to the cast shadow within on the grass, for those big areas, I'm varying as I move to slightly different areas. Notice I've got vertical brush strokes there, and then diagonal down and to the right, then cross hatching, and so on. So by varying the marks that we make, we can visually distinguish between different key areas of the drawing. Notice also that I haven't copied my reference exactly. The angle of the head is different in my drawing. I've changed the tail, as mentioned earlier, and the shape of this cast shadow is not exactly or all that close really to what's in the reference. But, the point is to be inspired by the photo and then make the drawing your own. Now, using a bit of artistic license just there to add some shadow to the tail, and that's much more about making the tail stand out a bit more than it is about being overly concerned about what it would actually look like under these lighting conditions. Now, within the very dark areas that I created earlier, for example, on this foreleg, I just wanted to add a bit of variation, so I just darkened further the top of that leg. And then in the reference, this other front leg is pretty much all in shadow, but I want to leave a bit of a highlight on the left-hand upper side. And then what I'm doing at the moment is just going back over my initial pen lines to just enhance the sort of fluffiness of the underbelly there. A bit more detail on the eye. And now back in with the pencil. So I always love alternating back and forth between two media or two techniques, depending on what I'm doing. So having put the pen lines in, I can now further enhance any shadows or shading where I feel appropriate by going over those with the pencil, and the pen lines will show through. That's absolutely fine. But now I can add some darker, softer shadows with the pencil and just put in bigger blocks of shadow. So having enjoyed all those delicious fiddly and intricate bits, I'm now looking at the reference and squinting once again to just look at the big blocks of shadow, but again also adding my own interpretation to the scenario. And just a general tip I would say for drawing or painting horns is that, generally speaking, the shadow you put in won't go all the way to the bottom edge of the horn. There'll generally be a little bit of reflected light. And now back to the head, and I'm just starting to think, well, where would any cast shadows be? And, you know, where do I want to add little bits of shading which are going to work with my drawing? And one thing I should mention is that I don't show this bit in the video, but once the penciling is complete and I'm happy with the drawing, what I then do is clean up using an eraser. And the one I find is best to use, or is a very good one to use, especially on Bristol board when you're using a 9B pencil, is a Mars Plastic eraser. So they seem to really lift off the pencil work and not leave any smudging or anything like that. So just to let you know, that's what I use. So what I would do is just go back around the drawing and clean up any bits of pencil shading which have gone a bit wayward. So perhaps areas where they need to be highlighted more, or my pencil shading is just strayed too far. So for example, if you look at the chest of the animal from sort of the bottom of the mouth down towards the upper left leg, you can see my pencil shading has gone beyond my biro line, and the same on the belly as well. So that will be cleaned up in the final version. And you can also use the eraser to pull out little highlights as well. So, as I say, a Mars Plastic eraser is a good one. So you can see I've added selectively extra dark areas in the cast shadow there with the pencil. And then just putting a few textural marks onto the back of the animal with the pencil as well. So you've got this combination of marks made with pencil, marks made with biro, shading done with ballpoint pen, shading done with pencil. And we can overlay all the different effects you can get with each of the two drawing implements to create a multiple dimensioned mark making drawing. So here's a closer look at the scanned in and cleaned up with the eraser drawing. So you can see some of the detailed line work there used on the cast shadows and on the animal itself. And you can see I cleaned up the edge of the chest there with the eraser, and the top of the head and the horns, pulled out some highlights. And there's the complete, about to come on screen in a few seconds, the complete drawing. So I hope you enjoyed this video. This is episode 1 of a series of, I think, 10 videos. It should be 10 drawings of native breeds of cattle in the UK. Hope you enjoyed the video and hope to see you next Sunday.